What if the man who wrote Mr. Blue Sky fired his string players by letter, or recorded a 70-minute masterpiece alone in the Swiss Alps while his band watched football? Inside E.L.O.'s spectacular spaceship stage, musicians suffered in miserable heat while fans went wild. A bass player who sang on their greatest hits left a courtroom forbidden from ever profiting from the music again. Jeff Lynne's obsession built something extraordinary. Then it consumed everything around it. To understand how Electric Light Orchestra fell apart, you have to understand where it came from and why it was always destined to belong to one man. Birmingham, England. The late 1960s. This wasn't London's swinging scene. This was a city built on iron and industry, on factories and smoke and the kind of grit that either breaks people or forges them into something extraordinary. Out of that landscape came Roy Wood, multi-instrumentalist, restless visionary, and one of the most creative minds Britain had ever produced. Wood led The Move, a band that had already scored hits with sharp psychedelic pop. But his ambition stretched far beyond chart positions. In 1968, Wood sat in a studio as a session orchestra recorded strings for The Move's debut album. Something clicked. He didn't just want strings as decoration. He wanted them as the engine, the driving force of a new kind of rock band. He was inspired by what George Martin had done with the Beatles, but Wood wanted to go further. He wanted an orchestra that rocked. Before we continue, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. For 2 years, Wood tried to recruit Jeff Lynne, then leading a Birmingham group called the Idol Race. Lynne finally agreed, but only under one condition. The two would simultaneously launch the orchestral project consuming Wood's imagination. The Move would keep generating income, while Wood and Lynne built something no one had ever tried before. The breakthrough came almost by accident. After the other musicians had gone home one night, Wood picked up a cheap Chinese cello he'd recently purchased. He had no classical training whatsoever. Instead, he applied the only technique he knew, the rock guitar approach of Jimi Hendrix, and began multi-tracking through a descending riff for a song called 10538 Overture. 15 overdubs later, the E.L.O. sound was born. When Lynne heard the playback the following morning, he immediately understood. They had found their direction. 10538 Overture reached number 9 on the UK charts in June 1972. But almost the moment the dream was realized, its first great crisis arrived. In July 1972, just as 10538 Overture was climbing the charts, Roy Wood quit. The man who had conceived E.L.O. walked away to form Wizard, taking pianist Bill Hunt and cellist Hugh McDowell with him. The departure was fueled by creative disagreements, and the growing realization that Wood's avant-garde instincts were pulling against Lynne's more structured pop sensibility. For Jeff Lynne, it was both a crisis and an invitation. With Wood gone, Lynne became the sole architect of the Electric Light Orchestra. He rebuilt around drummer Bev Bevan and brought in Richard Tandy on keyboards. This lean, adaptable core became the foundation of everything that followed. The early post-Wood albums, E.L.O. 2 and On the Third Day, showed Lynne stretching into progressive rock territory. The 11-minute anti-war epic Kiyama revealed his growing ability to construct complex musical movements within a rock framework. He was learning to sustain musical drama over long stretches, to build tension, release it, and rebuild it, with the patience of a composer rather than a pop songwriter. But even in these experiments, a pattern was emerging. Lynne was not just writing songs. He was designing sound, controlling every layer, every texture, with an intensity that went far beyond what most producers attempted. The other musicians played their parts faithfully, night after night, session after session. But Lynne shaped the final picture. He was shedding what he later called the avant-garde waffle of the band's early days, in favor of something more disciplined, melodically memorable songs built for radio, but constructed with orchestral depth. The vision was clarifying, and it was becoming, unmistakably, his alone. The year that changed everything was 1974. The album was El Dorado. For the first time, Lynne brought in a full orchestra and choir, not a small string section, but the real thing. the sound expanded into something genuinely cinematic. El Dorado earned major critical attention and a Grammy nomination for Best Engineered Non-Classical Recording, remarkable recognition for a band already several albums deep. El Dorado announced that E.L.O. was no longer experimenting. They had arrived. The recording home for this new era was Musicland Studios in Munich, Germany. This became his laboratory. Away from Birmingham and the British press, Lynne could retreat into the studio and rebuild the world from the inside out. The story of Evil Woman captures this period perfectly. The band was completing Face the Music in 1975 and realized they lacked a strong single. Lynne stayed behind while the others were out. He wrote and cut the backbone of the track in a matter of hours, melody, arrangement, and much of the instrumentation. When the band returned, the song was already taking shape. Evil Woman became one of their biggest hits. That efficiency was remarkable, but it was also a signal. If Lynne could produce a major hit alone in an afternoon, what did that say about the necessity of the people around him? His attention to sonic detail was becoming legendary. For the 1975 track Strange Magic, he used an MXR pedal, sweeping in time with the music. An effect he found so perfect that he kept the original pedal under his desk for decades. Each sound was chosen with the precision of a painter selecting pigment. Nothing was accidental, nothing was left to chance. By 1976, with a New World record, E.L.O. had perfected the symphonic pop formula, lush orchestrations, soaring harmonies, and a production sheen that made every track feel like a small masterpiece. The biggest moment in the band's history was just one album away. There is a scene that captures Jeff Lynne at the absolute zenith of his powers. It was 1977. He had traveled to the Swiss Alps to write the follow-up to a New World record. It rained. Day after day, it rained. And over 3.5 weeks, Lynne wrote and sketched out of the blue. 70 minutes of music, largely by himself. The album's third side, the Concerto for a Rainy Day, was a direct response to his environment. The weather became the music. The isolation became the art. When Out of the Blue was released in 1977, it became one of the best-selling albums on the planet, powered by the euphoric anthem, Mr. Blue Sky, a track so relentlessly joyful, it seemed to defy the stormy conditions that had surrounded it. The band at this point, Lynne, Bevan, Tandy, and bass player Kelly Grucut, was performing at a world-class level, but the recording sessions revealed a more complicated picture. Drummer Bev Bevan later recalled Lynne arguing with him until 6 in the morning to get the drum sounds exactly right. Lynne had developed a technique of recording drum components in separate passes, snare and kick on one take, cymbals and hi-hat on another, to eliminate any sonic bleed. The result was a drum sound of almost inhuman precision. It also reduced the drummer from a performer to a component. The full weight of this era arrived on the road. For the 1978 Big Night World Tour, the band commissioned one of the most elaborate stage productions in rock history, a massive, hamburger-shaped metal spaceship supported by 13 18-wheelers and 525,000 watts of light. 50,000 fans a night were dazzled. Inside the spaceship, the musicians were miserable. The heat warped string instruments mid-performance. The internal acoustics made monitors nearly inaudible. To manage these problems, the band relied on backing tapes, a technical safety net that was about to become a catastrophic liability. In August 1978, at the Pontiac Silverdome in Detroit, the safety net snapped publicly. A local promoter sued E.L.O. for $250,000, alleging that his team had confiscated backing tapes the band used during their performances, and that the audience had been sold a faked concert. The lawsuit was quietly settled out of court, but the damage was devastating. E.L.O., a band that defined itself by its studio craft, built on the premise that recorded sound could achieve perfection impossible in any other context, was now publicly branded as a miming act. The punk movement, already dismissing them as pretentious and overproduced, seized on the story. The very tools Lynne had developed to ensure sonic perfection had branded him a fraud. The irony was painful and precise. But the tape scandal was only the most visible of the fractures forming inside the band. By 1979, Lynne had decided the permanent string section was no longer necessary. Violinist Mick Kaminsky, cellist Hugh McDowell, and viola player Melvin Gale had been with E.L.O. through its most successful years. They had toured the world in the spaceship. They had played on the records that made the band famous. They were reportedly informed that their roles were over by letter. The decision was framed as a practical response to touring difficulties. But the musical reality was simpler. Synthesizers could replicate orchestral textures with greater precision and far less human friction. The string players had become, in Lynne's evolving vision, a logistical problem. And logistical problems had solutions. Discovery in 1979 was recorded primarily as a trio: Lynne, Bevan, and Tandy, with Lynne playing the majority of the instruments himself. Fans jokingly renamed it Disco Very. It was a massive commercial success. But the orchestra in Electric Light Orchestra was now largely a fiction, a sound Lynne generated alone, without the human beings who had once given the name its meaning. By the early 1980s, Jeff Lynne had become something the music industry rarely produces: a genuine studio hermit. The 1981 concept album Time reflected his inner state, a meditation on a man transported from the 1980s to the year 2095. It leaned heavily into synthesizers and vocoder, creating a retro-futurist sound that was both striking and lonely. More tellingly, Lynne was beginning to prefer the intimacy of home recording. He later admitted he hated the sound of professional studio machinery, the mechanical noise of other people's processes intruding on his private sonic world. He felt he could make a great record in an airy cupboard, if necessary. The Time tour of 1982 was E.L.O.'s last major outing as a full band. Lynne made no secret of his disdain for the road. The expectation to reproduce his studio recordings in a live arena felt like a betrayal of the records themselves. Then came 1983, and Secret Messages, and the final collapse of the Brotherhood. Lynne had envisioned the project as a double album, a return to the scale of Out of the Blue. He recorded backwards Secret Messages as a defiant response to fundamentalist groups who accused E.L.O. of hiding satanic content in their tracks. But the record company refused to release the double album. Lynne felt reduced to a commodity. The deeper wound came from within. Kelly Grucut, the bass player who had been with E.L.O. since 1975, who sang harmonies on Mr. Blue Sky and toured the world in the spaceship, sued Lynne for 25% of everything E.L.O. had earned since 1974. Grucut believed he was a creative partner. Lynne believed he was an employee. The case settled for £300,000. with Grucut agreeing not to pursue future profits from E.L.O. music. Two men who had shared a stage for nearly a decade left the courtroom as strangers. By 1984, Electric Light Orchestra existed in name only. Lynne was contractually obligated to deliver one more album. Balance of Power, released in 1986, was stripped of orchestration, built primarily from synthesizers, and recorded with the tired efficiency of a man completing an obligation. Richard Tandy recalled the process as Lynne and Tandy playing to a drum track in the control room, while Bevan added his parts later, alone. 3 men in a studio that once held an orchestra. The band mounted a brief European tour in 1986. George Harrison, Lynne's friend and soon-to-be collaborator, was part of the broader 1986 charity concert scene around E.L.O., but not a live E.L.O. member. When the tour ended, Lynne didn't look back. He moved on to produce Harrison's Cloud 9, a critically acclaimed return to form for the former Beatle. He formed the Traveling Wilburys with Harrison, Bob Dylan, Tom Petty, and Roy Orbison. E.L.O. was finished, not with headlines or public feuds. It simply stopped. The obsession that had built it had consumed everything it needed: the string players, the bassist, the touring apparatus, the collaborative spirit, and left Lynne standing alone in a studio that was now entirely his own. He had gotten exactly what he wanted, and what he wanted had cost him everything he'd built. Destruction, it turned out, was not the end of the story. In 1988, Bevan approached Lynne about a reunion. Lynne refused. But when Bevan announced he intended to continue performing under the E.L.O. name without him, Lynne took legal action. They settled out of court. Bevan could tour as Electric Light Orchestra Part 2, provided he paid Lynne a percentage of royalties and touring income. For a decade, E.L.O. Part 2, which eventually included former members like Kelly Grokut and Meek Kaminsky, performed the hits to nostalgic audiences across the world. They played arenas and theaters, keeping the songs alive for fans who simply wanted to hear Mr. Blue Sky and Evil Woman one more time, performed by people who had actually been in the room when the records were made. To the fans in those venues, the music was all that mattered. To Lynne, watching from a distance, it was a bastardization of his legacy, performed by men he had legally classified as employees, now profiting from a name that belonged, in his mind, entirely to his obsession. The rift lasted until 2000, when Bevan sold his 50% stake in the E.L.O. trademark back to Lynne. Lynne now owned the name completely, but what he owned was a legacy fractured, divided between the studio visionary who had built it and the live musicians who had kept it alive in his absence. On stages he refused to visit. For fans, he had turned his back on. The perfect band had become a legal entity. The music remained, but the people who made it had been filed away like settled lawsuits, concluded, closed, and shelved. For nearly 30 years, it seemed the Electric Light Orchestra had been permanently retired. Then 2014 arrived. Lynne agreed to headline a festival in a day at Hyde Park in London. He later admitted he genuinely feared no one would show up, that the audience had moved on, that the records were just nostalgia for a generation growing old. The crowd was 50,000 strong. When Mr. Blue Sky began, 50,000 voices sang every word back to him. Something shifted in the man who had spent 40 years building walls between himself and the people who loved his music. That moment of connection allowed Lynne to finally make peace with the E.L.O. legacy. He launched Jeff Lynne's E.L.O., a new iteration of the band that brought back live orchestral performance and the genuine joy of playing music for people who had carried it for decades. The songs endured. Mr. Blue Sky became a staple of film soundtracks. New generations discovered the catalog. And in the end, Jeff Lynne's obsession did destroy Electric Light Orchestra as a band, as a collective of human beings with shared ownership of a shared dream. But it also created a body of work that stands with the best popular music has ever produced. The tragedy and the triumph were always the same thing. He built a world so perfect he eventually had to live in it alone until 50,000 voices called him back into the light. Electric Light Orchestra proved that genius and obsession live at the same address, and one feeds the other until nothing else remains. Jeff Lynne gave the world Mr. Blue Sky, An Evil Woman, and Telephone Line. He built symphonic rock that no one had ever dared attempt. But the cost was counted in dismissed musicians, bitter lawsuits, and a brotherhood dissolved into silence. What's your favorite E.L.O. memory? Drop it in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories from rock's greatest era.